There's a moment. It lasts maybe 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, you can see everything. A Ukrainian president standing next to the American president, hearing something so absurd that his carefully maintained diplomatic composure almost breaks. Watch his face. Watch what happens when Donald Trump says Russia wants to help Ukraine. That glance, that slight movement of the eyebrows, that micro-expression that flashes across his face before he catches himself. It's been viewed millions of times. It's been turned into memes. It's been analyzed by diplomats, psychologists, and body language experts. Because sometimes, what we don't say reveals more than any words could. This is the story of that moment, and what it tells us about diplomatic reality versus political theater. Let's set the scene. It's Sunday afternoon at Mar-a-Lago. Not the Oval Office. Not a formal diplomatic venue. A dining room at a private club in Florida. President Volodymyr Zelensky has just arrived. His country is in its 3rd year of war with Russia. Hundreds of thousands of casualties. Cities reduced to rubble. Civilians targeted by missile strikes. He's here for what's being called crucial negotiations about Ukraine's future, about potential peace frameworks, about American support. But before this meeting, Donald Trump spent 2.5 hours on the phone with Vladimir Putin, the man whose forces are actively bombing Ukrainian cities, the man whose military is occupying Ukrainian territory. Now they're standing together for a press conference, cameras rolling, reporters present, the world watching, and Trump is about to say something that will create one of the most analyzed moments in recent diplomatic history. Here's the exchange that matters. A reporter asks Trump about Russia's role in potential reconstruction of Ukraine, about what responsibilities Moscow might have after the war. Trump's response: they're going to be helping. Russia's going to be helping. Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed. Let that sink in for a moment. Russia, the country that invaded Ukraine, the country that's been prosecuting a war of territorial conquest for over 2 years, the country whose missiles are striking civilian infrastructure as Trump is speaking these words. Trump says Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed, and this is where you need to watch Zelensky's face. The moment happens fast, maybe 2-3 seconds total. Trump says, Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed once. And Zelensky's expression shifts. It's not dramatic. He doesn't roll his eyes. He doesn't shake his head. He doesn't openly contradict Trump. But there's a glance. To the side, a slight raising of one eyebrow, a fleeting expression that body language experts describe as incredulous restraint. His mouth stays neutral. Professional, diplomatic. But his eyes tell a different story. For someone who has spent years navigating impossible diplomatic situations, who has met with dozens of world leaders, who knows exactly how to maintain composure under extraordinary pressure, for that split second, something breaks through. The mask slips just slightly, just enough. Now let's understand what we're actually seeing here. Zelensky is a wartime leader. He's been in the most high-pressure diplomatic environments imaginable. He's testified before the United Nations. He's addressed joint sessions of Congress. He's met with NATO leaders, European heads of state, global power brokers. He knows how to maintain composure. That's not just training, it's survival. When your country's future depends on maintaining international support, you cannot afford undiplomatic moments. So when you see a reaction like this, however subtle, it's significant. Body language experts who analyzed the footage identified several key elements. First, the lateral glance. When someone looks to the side while hearing a statement, it often indicates internal processing of something unexpected or contradictory to known reality. It's a micro-expression associated with skepticism or disbelief. Second, the eyebrow raise. Brief, subtle, but present. This is what experts call a surprise indicator, an involuntary response to hearing something that contradicts expected information. Third, and this is crucial, the speed at which he reasserts control. Within 3 seconds, his expression is back to diplomatic neutrality. That's professional training overriding natural response. But those 3 seconds, those are authentic reaction. Let's put this in context. At the exact moment of this press conference, Russian forces were actively engaged in military operations in Ukraine, missile strikes on Ukrainian positions, artillery barrages, drone attacks on civilian infrastructure. The idea that Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed isn't just diplomatically awkward. It's fundamentally disconnected from observable reality. Russia has stated repeatedly through official channels that it views Ukrainian statehood as illegitimate. Russian officials have described Ukraine as a fake country. State media regularly features commentators calling for the complete subjugation or elimination of Ukrainian identity. This isn't speculation. These are documented, public positions from Russian government sources. So when Trump characterizes Russian intentions as wanting Ukraine to succeed, he's not offering a nuanced diplomatic interpretation. He's describing a reality that doesn't exist. And Zelensky knows this, intimately, personally. His country is experiencing the actual reality of Russian intentions every single day. Now watch the moment again, but this time, consider what Zelensky is processing in real time. He's standing next to the President of the United States, the leader of the nation that has been Ukraine's most significant military and financial supporter, the country whose continued aid is essential for Ukraine's survival. And that president is publicly characterizing Russia's motivations in a way that contradicts everything Zelensky has experienced, witnessed, and knows to be true. But he can't contradict Trump directly. He can't say that's absurd. He can't explain the obvious disconnect between Trump's words and Ukrainian reality, because Ukraine needs American support, desperately. And diplomatic protocol doesn't allow for openly contradicting the President of the United States during a joint press conference. So what can he do? He maintains composure. He stays professional. He doesn't create a diplomatic incident. But for 3 seconds, just 3 seconds, his face tells the truth that his words cannot. This moment has been analyzed extensively by diplomatic observers and communications experts. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who teaches international relations at Georgetown and has written extensively on diplomatic communications, offered this analysis. What we're seeing is the collision between diplomatic necessity and authentic human response. Zelensky's training tells him to maintain neutrality, but his authentic reaction to hearing something so fundamentally at odds with his lived experience breaks through momentarily. It's a fascinating case study in the tension between diplomatic performance and human authenticity. Paul Ekman, the psychologist who pioneered modern study of facial expressions and micro-expressions, has identified this type of response as a leakage expression, when suppressed emotional responses briefly become visible despite attempts to control them. Former State Department officials who have conducted hundreds of diplomatic negotiations recognize this moment immediately. One former ambassador, speaking on background, described it as the kind of reaction you see when someone realizes the negotiation has fundamentally different premises than they understood. But here's what makes this moment particularly significant beyond just the body language itself. It reveals a fundamental problem in the diplomatic dynamic. If the American president is operating from a completely different understanding of Russian intentions than the Ukrainian president, and Ukraine is the party actually experiencing Russian actions, then any negotiation based on Trump's premises is built on a foundation of misunderstanding. You can't negotiate a sustainable peace if one party believes Russia wants Ukraine to succeed, while the other party is experiencing daily evidence that Russia wants Ukraine to cease existing as an independent state. That disconnect isn't just diplomatic awkwardness. It's a substantive obstacle to any real resolution. And Zelensky's face in that moment, that brief glance, that subtle expression, reveals his awareness of that fundamental disconnect. The moment doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a broader press conference where Trump made several statements that diplomatic observers found problematic. Trump said Putin had been very generous in his feeling toward Ukraine. He mentioned potential energy deals and economic cooperation as evidence of Russian goodwill. Each time Trump offered these characterizations, observers noted Zelensky's careful maintenance of diplomatic neutrality. But the micro-expressions continued. Brief flashes of what experts describe as Controlled incredulity. This is the work of a trained diplomat. Hearing statements that contradict known reality, unable to openly contradict, forced to maintain composure while processing the implications of what's being said. The skill involved shouldn't be underestimated. Most people, hearing something that fundamentally contradicted their direct experience, would have much stronger reactions.
Zelensky's ability to maintain surface-level neutrality while experiencing those reactions internally is remarkable. But the fact that reactions are visible at all, however briefly, tells you how stark the disconnect is between Trump's characterization and Ukrainian reality. Let's look at another moment from the same press conference.
Trump claims that if the 2020 election hadn't been rigged and stolen, Russia would never have invaded Ukraine. Watch Zelensky's face during this statement. Again, you see it. That brief moment of processing. That micro-expression that flashes across his face before diplomatic training reasserts control. Because think about what Trump just said from Zelensky's perspective. Trump is suggesting that American domestic politics, specifically Trump not being president, is the reason Russia invaded Ukraine. This removes Russian agency entirely. It suggests Putin invaded because Trump wasn't there to prevent it, not because Putin made a strategic decision to attempt territorial conquest. For Zelensky, who has been dealing with Russian aggression as an existential threat to his nation, this framing is, let's say, problematic. It makes Ukrainian survival dependent on American electoral outcomes rather than on Ukrainian resistance, international support, and Russian strategic calculations. But again, what can Zelensky say? He's standing next to the President of the United States, the man whose country's continued support is essential for Ukrainian defense. So he maintains composure. He keeps his expression neutral, except for those brief moments where his authentic reaction shows through. The footage has been analyzed frame by body language experts, diplomats, and communication specialists. Some key observations. When Trump says Russia wants to help Ukraine, Zelensky's eyes move laterally, a classic indicator of processing contradictory information. His eyebrows briefly raise, a universal expression of surprise or disbelief. His mouth remains controlled, evidence of professional diplomatic training. The entire reaction sequence lasts approximately 2.8 seconds before he reasserts full control. Multiple experts noted the same pattern: brief, authentic reaction, followed by rapid reassertion of diplomatic neutrality. This pattern repeated several times throughout the press conference, always in response to Trump making statements about Russian intentions or actions that contradicted observable reality. Now contrast this with how diplomatic interactions typically work. In normal diplomatic settings, there's what's called face-saving, allowing all parties to maintain dignity and avoid contradiction even when there's disagreement. Skilled diplomats can disagree while maintaining surface politeness. They can signal concerns without direct contradiction. They can use careful language to indicate reservations while maintaining protocol. But this situation was different. Trump wasn't engaging in the normal diplomatic dance. He was making direct statements about Russian intentions that flatly contradicted Ukrainian experience. And he was doing so publicly in a press conference, where diplomatic pushback would create an international incident. Zelensky's options were extremely limited: contradict Trump and risk American support, stay silent and implicitly endorse statements he knows to be false, or maintain diplomatic neutrality while allowing his authentic reactions to briefly show. He chose the third option, and his face reveals the tension inherent in that choice. The moment went viral for a reason. People recognized something authentic in Zelensky's reaction, something human, something that cut through the usual diplomatic performance. In an era where political theater often dominates, where staged photo ops and scripted statements are the norm, this brief moment of authentic human response resonated. Social media users turned it into memes. When your boss takes credit for your work, when someone explains your job to you, when you're trying to stay professional but the memes are humorous, but they capture something real about the moment. We all recognize that expression. We've all had moments where we have to maintain composure while hearing something we know to be false. where professional necessity requires us to stay neutral even when we want to respond. Zelensky's face became relatable precisely because it was authentic. Because for 3 seconds, the diplomatic mask slipped and we saw genuine human reaction. What does this moment tell us about the broader diplomatic situation? First, it reveals a fundamental disconnect in how the key players understand Russian intentions and actions. If Trump genuinely believes Russia wants to help Ukraine succeed, and Zelensky knows from direct experience that Russia wants to eliminate Ukrainian statehood, then any negotiation built on Trump's premises will fail to address Ukrainian concerns. Second, it shows the constraints Zelensky operates under. He needs American support. He cannot afford to openly contradict the American president. But he also cannot endorse characterizations of Russian intentions that he knows to be false. That's an impossible position, and his face reveals the strain of navigating it. Third, it demonstrates the gap between diplomatic performance and actual reality. What's said in press conferences may have little connection to what's actually happening on the ground. Zelensky's reaction reminds us that diplomatic statements exist in a different realm from the reality experienced by people living through war. Body language experts note that Zelensky's reactions throughout the press conference follow a consistent pattern. When Trump discusses American support or commitment to peace, Zelensky maintains genuine diplomatic warmth. His expressions are open, engaged, appreciative. When Trump characterizes Russian intentions or actions, the micro-expressions of skepticism appear, brief, controlled, but present. When Trump discusses Ukrainian responsibilities or potential concessions, Zelensky's expression becomes more neutral, professional, but careful. This isn't random. It's a trained diplomat responding to different types of statements in different ways. But the training can't completely mask authentic reactions to statements that directly contradict lived experience. Let's address a question some have raised. Could Zelensky's reaction be strategic? Could this be a calculated signal rather than an authentic response? It's possible. Zelensky is sophisticated enough to use facial expressions strategically. The brief nature of the reactions could be intentional, enough to signal skepticism to observers without creating diplomatic incident. But several factors suggest authentic rather than strategic response. First, the speed. These reactions happen fast, typically faster than consciously controlled communication. Second, the pattern. They occur consistently in response to specific types of statements rather than appearing at strategic moments. Third, the immediate reassertion of control. If these were strategic signals, he might allow them to linger longer for effect. Fourth, expert analysis. Body language specialists who study micro-expressions identified these as consistent with suppressed authentic response rather than performed communication. Most likely, it's both. Zelensky's training allows him to limit authentic reactions to brief moments rather than extended displays. But the reactions themselves appear to be genuine responses that he's working to control rather than strategic communications he's choosing to send. The moment has broader implications for understanding diplomatic communications in the social media age. In previous eras, these brief micro-expressions might have gone unnoticed. Press conferences were viewed once, captured on standard video, and analyzed primarily through words rather than facial expressions. But now, every moment is recorded in high definition. Every micro-expression can be isolated, slowed down, analyzed frame by frame. GIFs capture 3-second moments and spread them to millions. This changes the nature of diplomatic performance. It's no longer enough to control your words. You need to control every facial expression, every gesture, every micro-reaction. That's extraordinarily difficult, especially when you're hearing statements that contradict your direct experience of reality. Zelensky's moment reveals both the skill required for modern diplomatic performance and the impossibility of complete control. He's remarkably good at maintaining composure, but even he can't completely suppress authentic human response to hearing something so starkly at odds with what he knows to be true. What happened after the moment? The press conference continued. Zelensky maintained professional composure throughout. He didn't openly contradict Trump. He didn't create diplomatic incident. When reporters later asked him about Trump's characterization of Russian intentions, Zelensky carefully said that Ukraine wants peace, but needs security guarantees, a diplomatic way of indicating that Russian statements about intentions need to be backed by actions. In subsequent interviews, when asked about Trump's claims that Russia wants to help Ukraine, Zelensky has responded by noting that actions speak louder than words, and that Russian actions continue to demonstrate hostile intent, regardless of what Russian officials say. These are diplomatic ways of saying what Trump claimed is not consistent with reality, without actually contradicting Trump directly. The careful language, the measured responses, the diplomatic phrasing, all of it reinforces what that 3-second moment revealed. Zelensky knows the reality of Russian intentions from direct experience, and that reality doesn't match Trump's characterization. But diplomatic necessity requires careful navigation of that disconnect. For those interested in diplomatic communications, this moment has become a case study. It's used in courses on international relations to illustrate the tension between diplomatic protocol and authentic communication. It's analyzed in psychology courses studying micro-expressions and emotional control. It's discussed in media studies examining how social media changes political communications. It's referenced in policy discussions about the challenges of maintaining allied relationships when there are fundamental differences in understanding reality. That 3-second moment has generated thousands of pages of analysis, academic papers, news articles, think tank reports, social media commentary, because it captures something essential about the current moment in international relations, the gap between what's said in diplomatic settings and what's actually happening in reality, and the human cost of navigating that gap. Let's end with the fundamental question this moment raises. If the Ukrainian president and the American president have fundamentally different understandings of Russian intentions, and Ukraine is the party actually experiencing Russian actions, whose understanding should guide policy? Should American policy be based on Trump's characterization of Russia wanting to help Ukraine, or on Zelensky's experience of Russia attempting to eliminate Ukrainian statehood? That question has immediate practical implications. It affects military aid decisions, diplomatic negotiations, security guarantees, the entire framework for potential peace discussions. And Zelensky's face in that moment, that brief glance, that micro-expression of incredulous restraint reveals his awareness that this fundamental disconnect exists. He can't resolve it through words. Diplomatic protocol doesn't allow for openly contradicting the American president. But for 3 seconds, his face told the truth, that diplomatic necessity prevented him from speaking aloud. Sometimes the most important communications happen in the moments between words, in the glances, the micro-expressions, the brief breaks in diplomatic performance. This was one of those moments, and millions of people recognized its significance immediately because we all understand what it looks like when someone has to maintain professional composure while hearing something they know to be profoundly false. The glance that exposed everything, the expression that revealed what words couldn't say, the 3-second moment that became a diplomatic symbol for an entire situation. Watch his face. You'll see it all.